New York City just announced a new office to protect renters.
Right. Sounds like a good step on the surface.
It does. It's aimed at things like housing quality, fighting landlord abuse. But today, we're going to tackle a much deeper, a much less visible problem. Because history shows that when great cities collapse financially, the trigger isn't usually some external crisis. It's internal.
It's the political spending.
Political spending run amok, enabled by these fragmented, self-serving governance structures. That, our sources say, is the sickness that pushes a city into a fiscal death spiral.
And that's the core of what we're looking at. We're diving into the mechanisms that allow city governments to fail financially. We're using your documents on, municipal bankruptcy, the really brutal lessons from the 1970s New York City crisis.
And we're bringing it right up to today, looking at governance moves in 2026.
Our mission here is to really unpack how those choices, especially that temptation to spend money, you just don't have to win political favor, how that creates the spiral. We'll look at New York, at Detroit, and see how this fragmented leadership and, powerful special interests, how they erode financial stability.
The sources are pretty clear. Cities need to prioritize fiscal health over political games and resist that urge to just inflate the bureaucracy.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with the ultimate case study. New York City in the 1970s. The city was basically broke. What was the root cause here?
Well, the documents are really clear on this. The core problem wasn't some sudden economic shock or a market failure.
So not a recession or businesses leaving?
Not primarily, no. It was what the analysis calls inefficient and interest group-dominated municipal governance, which I know is a mouthful.
Okay, so what does that actually mean in plain English?
It means the political leaders were spending money aggressively, opportunistically, really, to cement political support. They were essentially using taxpayer money to lock in votes from powerful, organized groups.
And this is where the numbers get truly astonishing. The officials were just ceding to demands from these influential groups, right? Especially the public labor unions.
Yes. They were handing out these incredibly generous contracts and benefits. But crucially, they weren't asking for more productivity or cutting anything else to pay for it.
And that's what led to the budget just exploding.
Completely. I mean, look at this detail. In just a 2-year period in the mid-1960s, total city spending surged by 47%.
47%.
In 2 years.
In just 2 years. Almost half the budget growth. And a huge chunk of that was from those backroom deals with public labor unions.
And it wasn't just the unions. The sources show a massive increase in social spending at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. Spending on welfare doubled. And Medicaid spending quadrupled. This was just, a spending frenzy. There was no real plan to fund it long term.
So when the bills came due, what did they do? Did they fix the problem? No, of course not. That would have been politically difficult. Instead, they resorted to financial gimmickry. They tried to, and this is a quote, obfuscate their costs.
Obfuscate their costs.
Yeah, with new taxes, all sorts of accounting tricks, and just wishful thinking. It was a complete breakdown of budgetary responsibility. The system was just built to say yes because saying no was too hard.
So for anyone listening right now, watching their own local politics, what's the key red flag?
It's the lack of transparency. If you see politicians making these huge, expensive promises, but they never show you the real price tag.
They don't say what they're cutting to afford it.
Exactly. That's the modern version of obfuscation. You are literally watching the early stages of that same cycle play out.
Okay, that's the spending culture. Now let's pivot to the structure. Because if that spending was the engine of the collapse in New York, what about the machine itself? What parts of government in a place like, say, Detroit, allowed that engine to run wild?
This is a fascinating part of the analysis because fragmentation, where different parts of the government don't coordinate, it has very specific, very negative financial consequences.
And it's more than just wasting paper on duplicate forms, I assume.
Oh, it's so much worse. It does lead to duplication, sure, but the sources point out that fragmentation tends to generate, and I'm quoting here, a redistribution of wealth to groups that are able to influence the entity with expenditure authority.
Okay, break that down.
Think of it like this. If a special interest group wants city money, and there are, say, 6 different city departments that can all approve that kind of spending.
They only need to convince one of them.
Precisely. It multiplies the access points for political influence, which in turn inflates the overall size and cost of government because none of those departments will ever shrink.
And we see concrete examples of this in Detroit's government structure. I mean, it's almost absurd. Take city planning.
Right. You've got separate planning departments. One reports to the mayor, the other to the city council.
It's built-in conflict.
It's built-in redundancy and inefficiency, yeah. You're paying two sets of staff to often work against each other. And it's the same with the legal departments. The city council created its own legal team that constantly clashes with the city's official corporation council.
It's just duplication of these really high-cost services, all on the taxpayer's dime.
And this even affects public safety, which has direct financial consequences. The police chief selection, for instance, is constrained by this board of police commissioners.
And why does that matter for the budget?
Because low crime rates are essential for fiscal health. They attract businesses, they attract residents who pay taxes. But instead of the mayor having clear authority to run the police efficiently for the good of the whole city, you get this fragmented, diluted authority where local politics can get in the way of sound management.
The courts actually saw this link, didn't they? They cited cutbacks of police services as clear proof that the city was in a crisis.
Exactly. The bottom line is, when the money runs out, you can almost always trace it back to these entrenched, fragmented systems that reward special interests and just kill efficient management.
Which brings us to a really controversial question. If a city does this to itself, if it spends itself into oblivion, should the federal government step in and bail them out?
Ah, the million-dollar question.
Right.
Or in this case, the billion-dollar question.
And this whole debate really came to a head in 1975 with New York City, right? President Gerald Ford.
It did. Ford famously refused a federal bailout. He insisted that the, quote, real responsibility for the crisis belonged to the city itself, not to the American taxpayer.
He basically saw them as undisciplined, and a bailout would just reward bad behavior.
That was his argument, yes, which led to that infamous headline, Ford to City, drop dead. He suggested they should consider municipal bankruptcy, Chapter 9, because it forces the painful restructuring that politicians won't do on their own.
But municipal bankruptcy is very different from when a company goes bankrupt.
Very different. In a corporate bankruptcy, Chapter 11, creditors often get ownership stakes, seats on the board.
Right, like with the Chrysler restructuring, the government got a say in how it was run. There's real market discipline there.
Exactly. Chapter 9 for cities, it doesn't really have that. It's often criticized because it mostly just solves what's called the creditor holdout problem.
The what?
The creditor holdout problem. So imagine a city owes money to 100 different banks. 99 agree to take less than they're owed to settle it, but one bank, the holdout, refuses and sues for the full amount, threatening to derail the whole deal.
Okay, I see.
Chapter 9 lets a court force that holdout to accept the deal. It's useful, but it doesn't force the city to fix the bad spending habits or the fragmented government that got them into trouble in the first place.
So it settles the debt, but it doesn't cure the disease.
That's a good way to put it.
Which raises an even bigger question about federal involvement. What happens when the government tries to force change by, attaching strings to money?
Now you're getting into a major constitutional issue. The anti-commandeering principle.
Which basically says the federal government can't force states to carry out federal programs.
Precisely. And the clearest example of this was the Supreme Court case on the Affordable Care Act's Medicaid expansion.
The NFIB case.
Yes. The court found that threatening to take away all of a state's existing Medicaid funding if they didn't expand the program was unconstitutionally coercive. Chief Justice Roberts famously called it a gun to the head.
And the principle there is that you can't use federal money to destroy local political accountability.
Exactly. Because when Washington forces a local leader to implement some unpopular, expensive mandate, who gets the blame from voters?
The local leader.
The local leader. While accountability gets lost in D.C., it just encourages more of the same irresponsible fiscal behavior. The source material is really clear. Financial collapse is a political problem, and the solution has to be local structural reform, not federal bailouts.
Okay, let's bring this all back to today. January 1st, 2026, Mayor Mamdani signs an executive order revitalizing the mayor's office to protect tenants, or MOPT.
Right. And its job is to coordinate a whole bunch of existing city agencies, housing, buildings, health, finance, to crack down on landlord abuse.
So the city is framing this as a market problem that needs more government intervention. But from the perspective of our sources, if the city is already full of these fragmented, conflicting agencies, what does adding another layer of coordination actually solve?
Well, it risks making the problem worse.
How?
Because the core issue we identified in Detroit is that fragmentation leads to bigger government and more spending, creating yet another office, MOPT, just to coordinate the others. It adds to the administrative sprawl. It has its own budget, its own staff, its own political agenda.
It's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
It really is. Instead of streamlining the existing departments to save money and make them work better, they're just adding a new layer on top. This is the city expanding bureaucracy to solve a problem that arguably was caused by bureaucracy in the first place.
So we've connected the dots.
Yeah.
From the political spending of the 1970s to the broken governance structures in cities like Detroit, all the way to today.
And the sources argue that the only thing that really forces change is that harsh external discipline, whether it's the market or the threat of bankruptcy that Ford was talking about.
Right.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, when cities get into trouble, they face a choice. Endure that painful external discipline, or continue with these models built on political handouts and growing the bureaucracy, like creating a new office like MOPT. So the question for you listening to this is really this. Can a city truly fix its finances by just rearranging the chairs? Or does it have to fundamentally shrink the size of government and restore real accountability to the taxpayers? What do you think is the only effective path for a city trying to escape that death spiral?